Martha Stewart of DIY Motorcycle Folks. I've got what's left of a motorcycle shop that I had in Texas in this garage, financed by a silent partner who I cannot reveal. Went to school in East Texas with a bunch of crazy people that had a club, and we raced go-karts, and we raced motorcycles, and we flew airplanes, and we did a lot of silly stuff. It was a very conservative Christian college with a lot of rules, but we didn't see anything in the Bible, in the Old Testament or the New Testament, about wheelies or smoky burnouts, so we maintained quite a bit of that mantra. What we're going to talk about in this workshop is carburetors to begin with, and hopefully not bore you so much that you never come back. But the reason we're going to talk about motorcycle carburetors is they're terribly expensive to repair because they're very time consuming. And if you're into DIY, it would be so helpful if you understood how the thing worked. Because if you understand how the thing works, that's what they taught us to be an airplane mechanic. You would actually have practical exams where the teacher would say, where does this hole go? Why does this exist? And if we teach how the thing works, then it's very easy to troubleshoot. If you teach how the thing works, it's extremely easy to figure out why it's not working on the motorcycle. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the low-speed jets on your carburetor, because they're tiny and they plug up right away. My resume is kind of complicated, but it's basically this. I've got to hang around some folks in my jobs and in my hobbies that were wizards, real wizards. And I've been in several different companies that made turbochargers and racing engine parts. And you find out fast that there's somebody there, there's people there that are extremely sharp, and those are the guys that you want to spend time around. Those are the people you want to eat lunch with, and those are the people you want to build hot rods with in the evening. So there's a lot of knowledge that you see in and out of those shops, and you see what's going on, and if it can be conveyed to the do-it-yourself person, then they can do some really trick stuff in their shops. We want to get that out. And I know there's a lot of people doing really good work already. One of the tough things about owning motorcycles is that if you're dependent on the dealership, they got to make a living. Those mechanics have got families to feed, and it's expensive. And if they're marking up their parts, it gets very expensive. So you drop carburetors off at a motorcycle shop, and it's as expensive as having a car being worked on. You know, and if you can't take the carburetors off yourself and you drop the motorcycle off, and you've got gummed up carburetors in a four-cylinder motorcycle, it can be $600, it can be $1,000. And so if you understand how they work, it's not that difficult to work on them. We'll take you through it systematically and show you enough about how they work to where you can figure out why your motorcycle is not running properly. I'm going to try to cover carburetors in 3 sessions, and it could be 5, but we're going to see if we can get it done in 3. The first thing being the low-speed circuits, then we'll talk about the main circuit and the float control, the fuel control, and we'll wrap it all up with little subtle tricks that you need to know with the 3rd session. But we can also talk about brakes. Motorcycle brakes don't like sitting. Motorcycles sit a lot, so their brakes go foul on you pretty quick. Another thing we can talk about is electrics. Motorcycle electrics aren't that tough, but it would help if you had a little bit of school. In time, hopefully we'll grow this to where we don't have to get it all crammed into 10 minutes, and we're going to grow this to a point where we can do some fun things. I would really love to do audio of some of your favorite motorcycles, and we got to figure out how we're going to put cameras on motorcycles, which has already been done, but how can we track audio so you get to hear the coolest sounding motorcycles in the world. We're going to talk about things about engines that a lot of people that played with engines for 20 or 30 years are a little weak on, and where I've been and the people I've hung out with, I've learned some tremendous things. It doesn't make me special, it's just that I've been around the people that are really sharp about this stuff in my career, as well as working on airplanes. Blow that one side. Let me introduce you to my shop. This is going to be kind of rough on my producer because we're going to walk around a little bit, but my shop's a lot more interesting than I am. First thing you got to have in any decent man cave is you got to have TV and you got to have tunes. You need a little bit of speaker, preferably speaker that you can point at the driveway when you need to point it at the driveway and point it in the shop when you need it in the shop. If you work on motorcycles, generally the motorcycle's pretty close to you while you're working, so you can put your tools local. And this is really nice. Working on cars, your tools have all got to be very portable. But since the motorcycle's small, here you go. This is an RD350 that belongs to a friend. It came in for 3 or 4 little things and a year ago, and it has turned into a pretty close to a restoration, I would say. Back in the back, you've got some motorbikes of mine. This Ducati is a monster with a 1000cc motor, and I just put a pipe on it, so now we've got to get the fueling to work right on it. Next to that is an RD400 that I've had since I was a 20-year-old kid. Put 30,000 miles on it and rode thousands of wheelies. Just wheelies everywhere. I have more tickets in Texas doing wheelies than anybody I've ever met. My Triumph is in the timeout corner out in the yard right now because my Triumph came home on a stretcher. It's a 70 Bonneville, and it had an electrical problem last night. You laugh, but oddly enough, in all these years, it never had an electrical problem before, but it did yesterday, and it came home on the stretcher. It's out there in timeout. This motorcycle belongs to a fellow that bought it as a 99% finished custom. It's a CB900 Honda, and it's getting the latest and greatest electrical gizmos put on it. Moto Gadget, I believe they're called. So it's getting sort of a new wiring harness built for it right now. One little trivial thing is I'm raising grandchildren, and this is a hot-rodded Power Wheels toy. It started out life as a 6-volt Power Wheels toy. It is no longer 6 volt. It has a 20-volt cordless drill battery on it. It has motors on it that go on the Barbie Jeep, and it's got tires that hold air so it rides smoother, and this little Power Wheels will wheelie. Someday, if we all live long enough, that ZX14 over there is going to grow a turbocharger. That's in the bucket list. And someday, if we all grow old enough, this GPZ 1100 that's been owned by 3 friends of mine since new, I know its whole family and its whole history, that GPZ 1100 is going to become an Eddie Lawson replica. And many people have made replicas of Eddie Lawson's race bike from 81 and 82, the one that Muzzy tuned. A lot of it's being done in Europe. They're fanatics about it. But what they don't do is build a worthwhile motor. And Scotty's going to build a worthwhile motor because that's a drag bike motor. You can make it into a 1500. So why in the world would you want to keep it a 1000cc motorcycle when you can make it a 1500? There's CAD plating over there in the corner. I don't know what you're talking about.
What do you got over here?
What's that? Oh, yeah, that's a mini bike engine for grandbaby. It's QA50 Honda. It's very unusual. It's a very early Honda engine. It actually has push rods. Some people don't know that. The crudest, cheapest mini bike Honda made only had 2 forward speeds, and it had a push rod motor. And I got a couple of cranks to pick through and see if one of them's any good. Frame's over there. Decided it needed a white frame because I wanted to make it look a little more modern. And then some of the running gear, wheels and sprockets and things are sitting behind the producer. Have to decide whether these are going to be polished and clear coated like they were originally from Honda, or whether we're going to paint these. These are the brake back plates. Honda and many of the Japanese motorcycle manufacturers did a really nice job of putting clear coat finishes on aluminum, and it looks gorgeous till you leave them out in the weather. So now I've got to decide if I want to make it look original or whether I want it body color or white like the rims. First thing we're going to fool with is a round slide Mikuni carburetor. This is a relatively large one. It's installed on this motorcycle that came to me for some electrical wiring. I was not part of the build of this motorcycle. I'm only part of the wiring of this motorcycle. We're stealing its carburetor so I can show you how the low speed circuits work on a typical Japanese carburetor. Because if you understand how these things work, it's so much easier to fix them. These carburetors are referred to as slide carburetors because the throttle is a barrel valve. Actually, barrel valve is not the right term, but anyway, the slide is the throttle valve. There we're at slide down and we're at idle and there's no airway. Now we pick up the slide with our throttle cable and we've got an airway. When the slide's down, there's very little air flowing through the carburetor, and that puts another system into action. And the system we're going to talk about is the low speed circuits. The low-speed circuits have some of the smallest orifices in the carburetor. Most people take them apart, take these carburetors apart, and they clean everything so it looks good to the eye, and they miss what's really going on the low-speed circuit. And because it's out all the small passageways, it's the one that plugs up first. Typically, when you're pulling these things down, people get upset because they don't like the Japanese Phillips screws, or any Phillips screws. But actually, what works the best on these things is a really sharp driver, not the person, but the actual tool, and they wear. So if your screwdriver or your impact gun tips are worn, that's when you start killing these screws. If you've got good, fresh tips on your impact gun, life is much better. Now, all of these motorcycle carburetors that you'll fool with are called float carburetors. There's gasoline entering the carburetor, and you're trying to keep it at a certain level so that all these little sensitive methods of sucking fuel into the engine are consistent. They won't be consistent if the float level is not, but we're not talking about float level today. We're going to talk about the low-speed circuits. These are the floats in this particular Mikuni. They're actually incarcerated, if you will, on these little vertical posts. Most float carburetors, the floats ride back and forth on this little arm. This Mikuni is independent. Anyway, this determines how much fuel gets into the carburetor, but what we do with the fuel after we get it into the carburetor at low speed is what we're going to talk about today. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for part 2.